Every single conversation that we have, whether it's on race, whether it's on gender, whether it's on spatial planning of cities, it always comes down to the same thing. Can I eat reconciliation? I can't eat reconciliation. So until we move towards a space or a place in this country where we have some resemblance of socioeconomic equality, conversations about reconciliation will always be hampered. So young people are seeing the legacies of the past manifested in very real ways in their communities. So when they're walking down the street, when they're engaging with family or friends, this very visceral and real manifestation of the inequalities of the past is still there. So trying to think about a future becomes difficult when you're reminded of the past every single day. So until we talk about socioeconomic redress, and until we kind of think of ways of changing that, conversations about reconciliation is always going to be hampered and difficult to have.
Thank you, Eleanor. Just to move over to you, Dr. June, I always find it quite interesting, you know, the whole issue around memory work on our past, and how at the same time it's meant to promote reconciliation so that we do not you know, sort of commit those crimes again. But also at the same time, there's always a sense that it's divisive in nature, right? Because it reminds and opens up all these wounds about the past. And I would love to hear from you. In your view, has South Africa done a good job in teaching young people about the past through memory work? And also, how do we actually memorize the past in a way that promotes reconciliation?
Yeah. A very difficult challenge. I think South Africa has not really been able to recover and heal itself after '94. I think we're dealing with loss and mourning, and probably the anger stage of mourning. And teachers are sort of the mediators of memory in the classroom, but we don't know what exactly is happening in the classrooms. There have been some research, and I've also done some research on this in the classroom, but it's a complex thing because teachers bring in their own archive, their own biography, their own memory, their own anger, their own conflict, their own pain. And often this does not ensure the kind of outcome we do have. And then we have silences, intergenerational silences. We don't speak about slavery. We don't speak about the genocide of the Khoi. We don't speak about racism of all sorts in our society today. So memory work is risky, but it's important. So I've just spoken to somebody who's matriculated from Limpopo not so long ago, and he said for the first time he heard about the TRC was when he came to work for when he actually worked within a context where the TRC was being discussed. So something is lacking, and I think we have to invest time in South Africa for dealing with woundedness, because social inequality, structural inequality is going to be with us for a very long time. I don't think we can undo the years of enslavement and segregation and all of that, and apartheid and colonialism overnight. In the meantime, we have to heal.
Thank you very much. Zianda, I mean, I would be interested to know from you, you know, there had been this expectation, you know, we often talk about this born-free generation, right? And there had been a great deal of expectation that a new kind of politics would emerge with the birth of a so-called born-free generation. I would like to hear from you, what are your thoughts on the issue of, you know, sort of this generational change that comes about because we have a post-94 generation? To what extent are young people today less preoccupied about race in comparison to older generations that had first-hand experience of trauma and violence from apartheid?
I mean, first of all, I think I'd like to say that I think the term born free is a fallacy. Born free from what? because like our panel was saying, you know, young people still experience very much the same levels of educational inequality, you know, unemployment, many issues that their parents and even older siblings were you know, grew up in and were faced with every day. So I think that in and of itself is a fallacy that I think was also broken in 2014 with our elections. And so with that, you know, going forward from what we've learned from 2014, I think there's also, you know, we've also broken through this fallacy that young people are you know, not preoccupied with race either, because race plays into everything in our society. Again, from education, from access to schooling, so many different levels that race plays into, then intersects with gender, then intersects with sexuality and other issues. So I think I think that young people aren't necessarily preoccupied with race in the way that that was sort of institutionalized and that we saw on a big state level, but racism, and I think the scourge of that and what that's left on young people through their own parents' experiences, and obviously the parents then bring their experiences into how they raise, you know, how they raise their children. So in that way, there's a different kind of race conversation and dialogue that's happening that's far different to what you would have had in the past, but it's still very present amongst young people today.
Thank you. Thank you for those thoughts. I want to pick up on this issue of woundedness. I think, you know, the whole reconciliation discourse in South Africa now, it's really beginning to talk and confront our woundedness. But I always feel that, you know, where do we even begin to address woundedness? You know, what does healing look like? And I'd like to hear from you, Professor. I mean, you've been doing work around historical trauma, and also maybe to reflect on how does trauma manifest in the behavior of young people today?
You know, one of the observations that we've made in our work on historical trauma and memory, working actually with IJR, is the following, that far from, or rather not only is trauma passed on from one generation to the next, but there's also a sense in which that the contemporary experiences of young people are relevant. In fact, the contemporary experiences define their actions more than this idea of trauma being passed on from the past. This notion bears relevance, particularly when people were brought up in families where trauma was direct, they experienced the trauma directly. So one has to think about this idea of woundedness in a kind of, in a representational form, that sometimes it's not so much the actual wound that is being experienced or that is passed on, but it's the representation, it's the memory. You know, it's the memory, quote unquote memory. You know, a person who has not experienced trauma directly doesn't remember something that they never experienced, but rather it is the representation of that memory. For instance, you know, one of the very powerful images from the FISMA's fall that I remember is a young student holding a placard with the words, "My grandfather was a gardener, my father is a gardener, I refuse to be one." And that is a story of the transgenerational transmission of this woundedness, of nothingness, that my life, my identity is defined on the basis of being nothing, or of not having a serious role in the larger scheme of things. That doesn't matter whether I wake up or sleep, I have no role to play. And that impacts very negatively on the meaning of life, on the perception of the question, what does my life mean? What does it mean to be me in this society? If the answer is nothing, then that kind of evokes a deep feeling of pain. You know, when you feel that you are nothing, and this is what is repeated in every life of a young the majority of young people. This is why it's so important to remember that the stories of pain and black pain are not the same. You know, the story of black pain at UCT is not the same as the black pain of young people from informal settlements, for example. And we have to remember this, because then we understand exactly what we are dealing with when we're dealing with woundedness. One of the things that is not happening in the discourse on woundedness, or one of the issues that is not coming out very powerfully is the question of what the responsibility of political leadership in all of this. The political leadership that has made promises, and I don't mean just the ANC, I mean everyone. And that is what is missing in this discourse. Where does the responsibility lie for education improvement?
Thank you very
and
much.
so on?
Unfortunately, I have to cut you there because we have to go on a break. Stay tuned. We'll continue our discussion after this ad break.
Malume. Tell me, Sonny. Malume. Where is it? Where is it? Left. Oh, Sonny, it's behind your ear. Tiger. Get your malume. Get your you can do better, Mshana. Next time. What body? Fair too.
Yes, keep all my mixtape volume 1, my loader mix, man. And
Oh, okay. Wow, thanks, man. Away.
just 15 yana just for the boys.
Never.
Hey, guys. Compensation yana.
I don't have cash. Sorry.
Oh, skawara me IoT. That's why pay. Salary advance.
Kuraf ngaphandle. So rather stay at home and enjoy great entertainment like Greed and Desire, Ikazi, Isbaya, and lots more with DSTV Compact. Kumnandi Kaya.
Chicken and coke. Oh, I love a chocolate bar or the cookies and the meat. Keep your nouveau cuisine, 'cause all you know, just amazing. Cold chicken and coleslaw is a nice.
Welcome back. We continue our discussion on youth and reconciliation in South Africa, 20 years after the first TRC hearings were held in East London in 1996. Remember, you can join this discussion and pose questions to our guest here in studio. Our hashtag on Twitter is TRCat20. You can also follow us on Facebook. You can like the page of the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. And now we move over just to hear what are some of the questions that are coming there from our social media pages. Juzaida and Sam, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ayanda. On Facebook, we've got a question from Sabine Mateka asking, how do we work to reconvince black angry youth that reconciliation is indeed a viable option for South Africa? And we also had a tweet that came through from @G_Skiti saying, is there a way for young people to get involved in making sure that the expected level of reconciliation is achieved in South Africa? Juzaida, on your side?
Yeah, I've got one statement rather than a question on Facebook from Shadrach Tace, and he's saying that there are youth at higher education institutions who go to bed without something to eat. And then we also have a longer tweet by _Lebo Edgar on Twitter, and he's asking what is being done to educate youth, especially in schools, on understanding the mandate of the TRC. Why isn't the TRC prioritized at a basic education level?
Thank you very much, Juzaida, and also thank you to you, Sam. Just moving over to our guest here, you've heard the questions that are coming there from our social media platforms. Perhaps just to start with you, Dr. June, I mean, this whole issue about this anger amongst young black people, and I think in the past 2 years, there has really been a strong sense of black people, particularly young people, are very, very angry. And how do we then convince those young people to buy into this idea of a reconciliation?
Yeah, I think what is probably the most damning reality for us is that we're still living the situational inequality of apartheid. We're still geographically, in most instances, still very much within an apartheid kind of state. And this is something we cannot lie about. So that is the truth. That's what faces youth every day. How do we convince them? I think small initiatives would go a long day. The every day of post-apartheid, post-TRC South Africa, because that was the mandate of restorative justice, that that the responsibility for reconciliation has to go back to the people. So yes, government has a responsibility, but I think work such as the IJR's work and some other initiatives, that can help, but it will take time because it requires a kind of listening, a kind of training in listening skills, as they say, lalela in Zulu. And this is, I think this is the only way, through intense education that has the time and initiatives, that hopefully government will come to the table to do this, that this will happen. Also, I think it's very important to note that education, in terms of the TRC, and I speak under correction, Pumla, education as a priority in taking the work of the TRC forward. We've never really had a TRC on education in South Africa. Yet it was one of the most violent legacies of apartheid and colonialism. We didn't give it time, we didn't get there. So we're now in this phase where the everyday of the unfinished business of the TRC is facing us. And I think the only way is through actual work on the ground in local communities, but intense investment in that through taxpayers' money, etc., because it is in our soul that we're going to have to work with our souls and healing our souls. Otherwise, economically, we won't even make it.
Thank you. Eleanor, maybe you could take the next question. We have a person there on Twitter that's asking, is there a way for youth to promote